She walked into the military gala in a homemade dress and cowboy boots, and everyone laughed. Officers' wives whispered and pointed. They saw a trucker's daughter who didn't belong. But when the four-star general stopped his speech and asked for BD to stand up, the entire room went silent. What happened next left them speechless. The envelope sat on the dashboard of Jack Davis's truck like it didn't belong there. Too clean, too official, with its embossed gold seal catching the afternoon sunlight. Bella stared at it through the windshield, her boots planted in the Missouri dirt outside their single-wide trailer. 3 days. That's how long it had been sitting there, and she still hadn't opened it. You gonna look at it? Or are we gonna let it gather dust until Christmas? Jack's voice came from behind her, rough but warm. He was wiping grease off his hands with a rag that had seen better decades. Bella finally climbed into the cab and picked up the envelope. Her name was handwritten in elegant script, Miss Bella Davis. The return address read, Department of Defense, Armed Forces Recognition Committee. Dad, I don't understand why they'd invite me to anything. Jack leaned against the truck's door frame, his weathered face creasing into something between a smile and a wince. He knew exactly why. 6 months ago, he'd found Bella asleep at the kitchen table, her laptop open to a document titled Convoy Survival Protocol, Alternative Strategies for High-Risk Supply Routes. She'd been working on it for 8 months. Ever since he'd come home shaken from a delivery job, talking about a route through hostile territory that reminded him too much of old war stories. She'd published it online under the initials BD, too insecure to use her full name, too convinced no one would take a trucker's daughter seriously. Sometimes people notice good work, Jack said quietly, even when you try to hide it. What Bella didn't know, what Jack would never tell her unless forced, was that his beloved Peterbilt, the truck that had carried them through her childhood, through her mother's death, through every struggle, was no longer fully his. He'd taken out a loan against it 8 months ago to pay for her online college courses. Logistics and supply chain management. She'd wanted to quit, said it was too expensive, that she could work at the diner and figure things out later. He couldn't let her do that. I don't have anything to wear to something like this, Bella said, turning the envelope over in her hands. So make something. You're good at that. She was. Her grandmother had taught her to sew before passing, and Bella had kept the old Singer machine running through sheer stubbornness. That night, she spread fabric scraps across the trailer's tiny living room floor, pieces left over from curtains, a tablecloth, an old dress of her mother's she'd never been able to throw away. Under the single lamp, she began cutting and pinning. Jack watched from the kitchen, drinking coffee that had gone cold. He saw his daughter's hands move with precision, the same way she approached everything, methodful, careful, never wasteful. She'd inherited that from him, along with his stubbornness and his habit of putting everyone else first. 2 weeks later, Bella stood in front of the bathroom mirror, barely recognizing herself. The dress fit well, simple, cotton, with long sleeves and a modest neckline. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest. She'd paired it with her grandmother's old cowboy boots, the leather worn soft and comfortable. Jack appeared in the doorway, wearing a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit his broad shoulders. I'm coming with you. Dad, you don't have to. I'm coming. The drive to Washington took 14 hours. They couldn't afford a hotel, so Jack parked the truck at a rest stop outside the city, and they slept in the cab like they'd done on summer trips when Bella was young. She woke before dawn, watching her father's chest rise and fall, noticing how gray his beard had become, how the lines around his eyes had deepened. He'd given her everything, his time, his money, his truck, and she'd written a manual that maybe had reached someone who needed it. As the sun rose over the Capitol, Bella thought about Lieutenant Tobias Holt, whose name she didn't know yet, whose life she'd saved without ever meeting him. She thought about the 19 soldiers who'd followed her strategies and made it home. She thought about all of this as Jack started the engine and pointed the truck toward a ballroom where she absolutely, certainly, did not belong. Ready? He asked. Bella smoothed her handmade dress and nodded. She had no idea what waited for her inside. The Capitol Hotel's entrance was guarded by Marines in dress blues, their white gloves pristine as they opened doors for guests arriving in town cars and limo uses. Jack pulled the Peterbilt into the parking area designated for service vehicles, and Bella pretended not to notice the valet's confused expression. "We'll use the side entrance," Jack said, his voice tight. "Dad, it's fine. I'll find my way in." But Bella took his arm and walked straight through the front doors. If she was going to be out of place, she might as well own it from the start. The ballroom stole her breath. Not because it was beautiful, though it was, with chandeliers dripping crystal and tables dressed in ivory linen, but because of how thoroughly she didn't belong. Women glided past in gowns that cost more than Jack's truck payment, their jewelry catching light like small fires. Men in uniform stood in clusters, their chests decorated with ribbons Bella had only seen in textbooks. She felt every eye turn toward her boots. The click of worn leather on marble echoed too loud, too rural, too wrong. "Is she lost?" The voice came from somewhere to her left, a woman in emerald silk, mid-40s, with the kind of posture that came from years of military spouse events. Her companion, younger and sharper, didn't bother lowering her voice. "Maybe she's looking for the catering entrance." Bella's face burned. She focused on the registration table ahead, where a young officer was checking names against a list. When she gave hers, he scanned the page twice, clearly surprised to find it there. "Miss Davis." "Yes." "Welcome." He handed her a name tag that felt like a target on her chest. Jack squeezed her shoulder once, then disappeared toward the back of the room where other non-military guests were gathering. Family members, civilian contractors, people who knew they were accessories to the main event. He found a spot near the service entrance, standing rather than sitting, his borrowed suit already uncomfortable. Bella searched for an empty table, but the room was filling fast. She ended up at a table near the kitchen doors, half hidden by a floral arrangement the size of a small car. Perfect. She could watch, fulfill whatever obligation had brought her here, and leave without further humiliation. "Excuse me." A woman's voice, professional and clipped. Bella looked up to find an officer in uniform, captain's bars on her shoulders, a press badge clipped to her jacket. Asian features, sharp eyes that missed nothing. "I'm Captain Sarah Allen, Military Press. Mind if I ask what brings you to the gala?" Bella's throat tightened. "I was invited. I gathered that." Allen pulled out her phone, clearly ready to take notes. "But this event is typically for active military, veterans, or defense contractors. You're nobody." "I'm nobody." Allen's expression shifted slightly. Not sympathy exactly, but something like recognition. She'd seen plenty of people who didn't fit at these events, usually relatives dragged along to fill seats. "Look, I'm just doing my job. Human interest piece. Faces of the gala kind of thing." Before Bella could respond, a burst of laughter erupted from a nearby table. The woman in emerald silk was telling a story, gesturing toward Bella without quite pointing. "Homemade dress? Can you imagine? And those boots. Someone should tell her this isn't a barn dance." A colonel's wife joined in, her diamond bracelet flashing. "I heard she came in a truck, an actual semi-truck. Parked it with the delivery vehicles." Allen's jaw tightened. She'd covered enough of these events to know the type. People who measured worth by rank and appearance, who'd never gotten their hands dirty a day in their lives. She glanced at Bella, expecting tears or anger. Instead, she saw something else. Bella's hands were folded on the table, steady despite the color in her cheeks. Her chin was up. She wasn't running. "You should go," Bella said quietly. "I'm not a good story." But Allen didn't move. Her journalist instincts were humming now. This girl had been invited for a reason. Someone wanted her here in this room at this event. And whoever it was had enough pull to get her name on the list. Across the room, Jack watched his daughter shrink into her chair, his hands curled into fists. He'd driven through blizzards, navigated mountain passes in the dark, faced down aggressive drivers on narrow highways, but he'd never felt as helpless as he did watching his daughter be mocked by people who wouldn't last a day doing what she'd done. She'd worked herself sick writing that manual. She'd researched, analyzed, reached out to veterans online, studied tactical reports until her eyes blurred. All because she wanted to help. Because she couldn't stand the thought of people dying on supply routes when maybe, possibly, there was a better way. The lights dimmed slightly. A voice over the speakers announced that the program would begin shortly. Bella exhaled slowly, grateful for the darkness. Just a few more hours. Then she could leave, forget this ever happened, and never pretend to be something she wasn't again. At the podium, General Marcus Holt was reviewing his notes one last time, his hands trembling slightly. In his briefcase, dog-eared and highlighted, sat a printed manual with the initials BD on the cover. He was about to tear his speech apart. General Marcus Holt had given hundreds of speeches. He'd addressed Congress, briefed presidents, delivered eulogies for soldiers whose names were carved into his memory. He knew how to command a room, how to project strength even when grief threatened to break him. But tonight, his carefully prepared remarks felt hollow. The applause died down as he approached the microphone. For stars gleamed on his shoulders. 3 decades of service, 2 wars, countless commendations. The room expected the usual gratitude, valor, sacrifice. The comfortable words that let everyone feel good about themselves. He started reading. We gather tonight to honor those who serve, those who sacrifice, those who stand between. His voice trailed off. He looked down at his notes, then at the audience. Hundreds of faces, most of them comfortable, satisfied, safe. How many of them understood what it really cost? How many had held a phone while a nephew called from a field hospital, voice shaking, describing an ambush that should have killed everyone? Holt set his notes aside. I'm going to say something different tonight. His voice was rougher now, stripped of formality. 8 months ago, my nephew, Lieutenant Tobias Holt, was commanding a supply convoy through hostile territory. Standard route, standard protocol. Everything by the book. The room shifted. This wasn't the speech they'd expected. They were ambushed at dawn. 3 vehicles, 20 soldiers, and a road that turned into a kill zone in seconds. Holt's hand gripped the podium. Standard protocol says you push through, maintain speed, get to the checkpoint. That's what Tobias was trained to do. That's what every manual tells you. Bella's heart began to race. She knew this story. She'd written about this exact scenario. But Tobias had read something else. A tactical analysis published online by someone who signed it only with initials BD. This person had studied convoy ambushes differently. They'd looked at terrain, timing, supply chain vulnerabilities. They'd proposed strategies that seemed unconventional, even reckless to traditional strategists. Captain Allen's pen stopped moving. She leaned forward. Tobias followed those strategies. Instead of pushing through, he did something the enemy didn't expect. He used the terrain, repositioned his vehicles, turned a kill zone into a defensive position. 19 soldiers. That's how many came home because someone thought differently, wrote it down, and shared it freely. The general's voice cracked. He paused, visibly struggling. My nephew is alive because of those initials. BD. We searched. Military intelligence, defense contractors, academic institutions. Who was the strategist? What credentials did they have? What military experience? Bella felt the blood drain from her face. We found nothing. Just a document uploaded anonymously, shared soldier to soldier, downloaded and printed and passed around until it became required reading for units heading into supply duty. The brass dismissed it initially. Unverified source, they said. Unconventional methodology. But the soldiers knew better. They knew it worked. Holt stepped away from the podium, his eyes scanning the crowd. The ballroom was absolutely silent. I was told that BD might be here tonight. I was told there was a chance I could meet this person. Thank them. Tell them that my sister's son is getting married next spring because someone cared enough to think deeply about a problem and share the solution. Jack's legs nearly gave out. He gripped the wall for support. So I'm asking now, in front of everyone here, is BD in this room? Bella couldn't breathe. Every instinct screamed at her to stay silent, to let the moment pass, to remain invisible. She was just a trucker's daughter. She had no business accepting recognition in front of generals and colonels and people who'd actually served. But then she thought of Tobias Holt, a man she'd never met, getting married because he'd lived. She thought of 18 other soldiers going home to families who would never know how close they'd come to loss. She thought of her father, who'd mortgaged his entire life so she could learn, grow, think. Her hand shook as she raised it. The movement was small, tentative, but in the silence it might as well have been a gunshot. Every head turned. Bella stood on trembling legs, her homemade dress suddenly feeling like armor instead of a costume. General Holt's eyes found hers across the crowded room. He saw the cowboy boots, the handmade dress, the young woman who'd been sitting alone near the kitchen doors. His expression shifted through confusion, recognition, understanding. Then he began to walk, not back to the podium but down the steps through the tables directly toward her. The woman in emerald silk's mouth fell open. The colonel who'd laughed about the barn dance went pale. Captain Allen stood up, her phone already recording. Jack Davis watched through tears as a 4-star general crossed a ballroom to reach his daughter. And Bella stood there, terrified and proud and completely unprepared for what would happen when he arrived. General Holt stopped 3 feet from Bella. Up close, she could see the weight of command in his face, the lines carved by difficult decisions, the grief that never fully left a man who'd sent soldiers into harm's way. But she also saw something unexpected: vulnerability. He came to attention. Then, slowly and deliberately, he raised his hand in a formal military salute. The gesture struck the room like lightning. Officers stood instinctively. The woman in emerald silk's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. No one noticed. A 4-star general was saluting a civilian, a girl in cowboy boots. Bella's mind went blank. She didn't know protocol, didn't know what to do. She simply nodded, the way her father had taught her to accept respect, with humility and acknowledgement. Holt lowered his hand. When he spoke, his voice carried across the silent ballroom. "Miss Davis, your work saved 19 lives. You did what rooms full of trained strategists couldn't accomplish. You saw the problem with fresh eyes, without the weight of doctrine limiting your thinking." He paused, emotion thick in his throat. "My nephew calls you his guardian angel. He carries a printed copy of your manual in his pack. So do the soldiers under his command." Bella's voice came out barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to help. I didn't think anyone would actually use it. That's exactly why it worked." Holt smiled, tired but genuine. "You weren't writing to impress superiors or advance a career. You were solving a problem because it needed solving." Captain Allen pushed through the crowd, her journalist instincts now fully engaged. This wasn't just a human interest story. This was a revelation. She began piecing together the larger narrative. How Bella's manual had been dismissed by upper command as amateurish, how it had spread through unofficial channels, how frontline soldiers had trusted it over official doctrine because it actually worked. "Miss Davis," Allen said, her phone recording, "can you tell me what qualified you to write tactical military strategy?" Bella looked at her father, still standing by the wall, his face wet with tears. "My dad's a long-haul trucker. He taught me about routes, about reading terrain, about what happens when things go wrong far from help. I just applied those same principles to military supply chains." A colonel approached, older, silver-haired, with kind eyes. "Ma'am, I commanded logistics in the same region. I read your manual after my own convoy used your strategies successfully. I wanted to submit it through proper channels, but we couldn't verify the source. The brass wouldn't make it official doctrine without credentials. Because I'm nobody, Bella said simply. No, the general's voice was firm. Because they were looking at the resume instead of the content. It's a mistake we make too often, valuing credentials over capability, tradition over innovation. Movement at the back of the room. Jack was making his way forward, decades of feeling out of place in formal settings warring with the overwhelming need to reach his daughter. Officers and spouses parted for him, many now realizing who he was, the trucker, the father, the man who'd sacrificed everything. When he reached Bella, she fell into his arms. No words, just the solid presence of the person who'd believed in her when she didn't believe in herself. General Holt watched them, understanding passing across his face. He turned to an aide. Find out if Miss Davis's manual has been formally recognized. If not, I want it submitted to the Joint Chiefs tomorrow. And I want her credited properly. Full name, not initials. The woman in emerald silk approached hesitantly, her earlier confidence shattered. Miss Davis, I owe you an apology. I was cruel, and you didn't deserve that. Bella met her eyes. You didn't know. Nobody did. That's not an excuse. The woman's voice broke slightly. My son deploys in 3 months. Supply convoy duty. If he comes home safe because of what you wrote. She couldn't finish. Others came forward. Officers wanting to shake her hand. Spouses apologizing. Young soldiers thanking her for caring about their survival. But the most meaningful moment came when General Holt opened his briefcase and pulled out his personal copy of her manual. The pages were dog-eared, covered in annotations, coffee-stained from late-night reading sessions when worry about Tobias kept him awake. Would you sign it? He asked. Bella took the pen with shaking hands. She started to write BD, but stopped. She looked at her father, at the general, at Captain Allen still recording everything. She wrote her full name, Bella Davis. As the gala continued around them, the narrative had shifted completely. Captain Allen was already drafting her article, knowing it would make national news. The military journalist who'd come expecting another routine event had found something real. A story about how the most valuable contributions sometimes come from the most unexpected places. Jack stood with his arm around Bella's shoulders, no longer hiding in the back, no longer feeling like he didn't belong. A colonel approached him, extending his hand. Sir, I want to thank you for raising someone who gives a damn. That's rarer than you'd think. Jack's voice was gruff with emotion. She's always cared too much. Thought it was a weakness sometimes. It's her strength, the colonel replied. As midnight approached, Bella sat with her father at a table now surrounded by officers and their families. Her handmade dress and cowboy boots no longer marked her as an outsider. They marked her as someone authentic, someone who'd done real work with limited resources and emerged with something valuable. General Holt returned to the podium to close the evening. Tonight reminded me why we serve. Not for recognition or medals, but because somewhere, someone we'll never meet is working to make things better. Our job is to notice them, listen to them, and get out of their way. Bella and Jack drove home in the Peterbilt as dawn broke over Missouri. The truck that had been mortgaged to give her a chance, that represented everything her father had worked for, carried them both back to their trailer. But everything had changed. Not because Bella had been recognized, but because she'd proven something essential. Heroism doesn't require a uniform or a stage. Sometimes it just requires caring enough to try, even when you're certain no one's watching. Sometimes it requires being brave enough to raise your hand. Bella walked in as an outsider and left as a hero. She never sought recognition, never wanted the spotlight. She just wanted to help. Her story reminds us that real courage doesn't come from fitting in or looking the part. It comes from doing what's right, even when no one knows your name. What would you have done in Bella's place? Share your thoughts below, and if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to embrace the journey for more inspiring stories.